The airport was crowded. People rushed from one gate to another, some dragging suitcases, others checking their phones. It was just another busy day of travel. At Gate 34, a flight to New York was preparing to board. A group of passengers had already formed a line in front of the sign that read, "First Class Boarding." Among them walked a calm, confident woman named Danielle. She wore a dark blue blazer, black pants, and polished shoes. Her hair was tied neatly, and her eyes showed quiet strength. In one hand, she held a leather bag. In the other, her boarding pass. Danielle stopped in front of the gate and looked at the screen. Everything looked right. Gate 34, Flight 778, Seat 2A. She stepped forward toward the first-class line. Behind the boarding desk stood a flight attendant named Lisa. She was tall, blonde, and dressed in a crisp uniform. As soon as Lisa saw Danielle walking toward her, her face changed. Her smile dropped. Her eyes scanned Danielle from head to toe with judgment. Lisa quickly stepped in front of the scanner and raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said loudly. "This line is for first-class passengers only." Danielle paused. She looked around. There were only a few people in line. All of them were white, and none were stopped like she was. She calmly held out her boarding pass. "Yes, I'm in first class. Seat 2A. Lisa didn't take it. Instead, she frowned and folded her arms. "Are you sure? This area is only for premium boarding." "I'm sure," Danielle replied, her voice still calm. "Would you like to scan it?" Lisa looked at the ticket, then at Danielle again. She didn't move. Instead, she leaned closer to her coworker and whispered, "It must be fake or something. I'm calling a supervisor." Danielle heard it. So did the man standing behind her in line. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her and then at Lisa. Lisa picked up the phone and dialed. "Hi, can you come to Gate 34? I need help verifying a boarding pass." "Yeah, first class. Just hurry." Danielle stood still. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. But her hands gripped her bag a little tighter. People nearby started to look. A couple at the gate looked up from their phones. A child asked, "Mommy, why is that lady not allowed to get on the plane?" The mother shushed him and whispered, "Keep your voice down." Minutes passed, but it felt longer. Lisa kept typing on the computer, pretending to be busy, but she kept looking at Danielle like she didn't belong. Finally, a man in a suit walked up. He was the airline supervisor, Mr. Reyes. "What's going on here?" he asked. Lisa stood straight. She's claiming to have a first-class ticket, but something doesn't feel right. Mr. Reyes turned to Danielle. "May I see your ticket, ma'am?" Danielle handed it to him without a word. He scanned it, checked the screen, then looked up. His face changed. "This ticket is valid," he said. "First class. Seat 2A. Danielle nodded once. "That's what I said." Lisa still looked unsure. "But..." Mr. Reyes raised a hand. "She's fine, Lisa. Let her board." Lisa stepped back. Danielle walked past her without another word. Her heels clicked softly against the floor. She didn't look angry. She didn't roll her eyes. But her silence said everything. As she walked through the gate, some passengers watched quietly. Others looked away, pretending they hadn't noticed. But inside, many felt something. Discomfort, guilt, or shame. The man behind Danielle in line finally stepped up. He leaned toward Lisa and said, "That was hard to watch." Lisa didn't answer. She just stared at the screen. Inside the plane, Danielle found her seat, 2A. She placed her bag in the overhead bin and sat down. She looked out the window, her face calm again. But her heart wasn't calm. She had felt this before, too many times. She pulled out a folded letter from her bag and looked at it. The letter was from the National Medical Leadership Conference. She was invited to speak as the lead guest that evening. A talk on grace under pressure, leading with dignity. She smiled sadly and whispered to herself, They have no idea who I am. Danielle settled into her seat, 2A, by the window. She placed her leather bag gently under the seat in front of her and looked out at the runway. Planes were taking off, one after another, their engines loud but distant. The flight crew moved through the aisle, helping passengers with bags and checking tickets. As they passed by Danielle, she gave a polite smile. Most didn't smile back. Some didn't look at her at all. A few rows behind, Lisa walked slowly toward the front of the cabin. Her face was stiff. She was clearly unhappy. As she reached Danielle's row, she stopped and pretended to check the overhead bins. Then she looked down and said, "Ma'am, are you sure this is your seat?" Danielle turned her head slowly. "Yes," she said calmly, holding up her ticket. "Seat 2A, first class." Lisa looked at it again. "Well, sometimes upgrades happen by mistake. I'll double-check with the system." Danielle nodded slightly. "Feel free." A businessman in 2B raised an eyebrow. He had been quiet the whole time, but now he glanced at Lisa with clear disapproval. Danielle noticed but said nothing. She had learned long ago when to speak, and when silence spoke louder. Lisa walked away, and Danielle leaned back in her seat. Across the aisle, another passenger, a middle-aged woman in pearls and a gray dress, kept staring. When Danielle met her eyes, the woman quickly looked down at her magazine. Minutes later, Lisa returned. She didn't say anything. She just gave Danielle a cold look, then moved on to serve drinks to the other passengers. The man in 2B finally spoke. "I'm Mark," he said kindly. "Sorry about what happened out there." Danielle looked at him and gave a small smile. "Thank you. It happens. You handled it well," he added. Danielle nodded. "I've had practice." Mark paused, then looked around. "Seems strange, though. You're dressed better than half the people in here. They still treated you like you didn't belong." Danielle turned her eyes back to the window. "That's the point," she said softly. "I don't have to look the part to belong. I paid like everyone else." Mark sat in silence. He had no answer. After takeoff, the cabin grew quiet. Soft music played. Passengers sipped drinks and scrolled through movies. The other flight attendants moved through the aisles offering champagne, water, and snacks. When they reached Danielle, they skipped her. She waited. She watched them serve the next row, then the next, but they didn't stop at her seat. Lisa came back holding a tray. She leaned over to Mark. "Would you like something to drink?" Mark looked at her, then at Danielle. "Yes," he said clearly, but she was waiting first. Lisa froze. "Oh, I'll come back," she said quickly, turning away. Danielle didn't even flinch. She had been ignored before. But this time, her heart ached, not for herself, but for what her silence was teaching others. For every little girl who might one day sit in this seat and be treated the same way. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. On the screen was the draft of her speech. She read it again to keep her mind calm. Across the aisle, the woman in pearls whispered to her husband, "I don't think she's supposed to be here." Danielle heard it. So did Mark. He leaned in a little. "I know this flight seems long already," he said to Danielle, "but something tells me you've been through worse." Danielle gave a small laugh. "Much worse. Mind if I ask what you do?" he said. Danielle looked at him for a second. "I'm a surgeon." Mark raised his eyebrows. "Impressive. I work with children," she added. "Mostly life-saving operations. I also lead a team that travels to countries that don't have access to hospitals." Mark blinked. "Wow. And tonight's flight?" "There's a medical conference in New York," she said. "They asked me to speak." Mark sat back, surprised and a little ashamed. He looked around the cabin, suddenly seeing things differently. Danielle returned to her phone and quietly scrolled through the names of children she had helped over the years. She never forgot their names, never forgot their faces. Lisa passed by again and paused beside her. Danielle looked up, waiting for her to say something. Lisa didn't. She walked on. Danielle closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The sky outside the window was wide and blue, but inside the plane, she still felt trapped. The seat was soft, the lights were dimmed. Outside the window, the clouds floated peacefully under the plane. But for Danielle, the flight felt heavy. Not because of the air pressure or turbulence, but because of the silence. The kind of silence that carries judgment. She sat still in her first-class seat, eyes forward, hands folded in her lap. The air around her felt cold, not from the temperature, but from the stares, the side glances, the fake smiles. Across the aisle, Mrs. Aldridge, the woman in pearls, kept glancing over. Each time Danielle moved, touched her phone, adjusted her jacket, took a deep breath, the woman's eyes followed her. Danielle noticed. So did Mark, the businessman in 2B. He leaned closer. "You okay?" he whispered. Danielle nodded slowly. "I'm used to it." "That doesn't mean it's right," Mark said. Danielle gave a soft smile, but her eyes were tired. The flight attendants rolled the cart down the aisle again, handing out meals. Lisa didn't make eye contact with Danielle. She set a tray down on Mark's table, then moved toward the back. Danielle waited. Nothing. She looked up. The cart was already 2 rows behind. "Excuse me," she said gently. Another flight attendant glanced back, but didn't stop. Mark noticed. "Are they skipping you again?" Danielle nodded. Mark pressed the call button. Lisa returned, her face tight. "Yes, sir." "You skipped her meal," Mark said, pointing at Danielle. Lisa didn't apologize. "Oh, I thought she didn't request one." Danielle looked at her calmly. "I didn't get the chance." Lisa sighed. "We may be out of the chicken." Danielle said, "Anything is fine." Lisa walked away. Mark shook his head. Unbelievable. Danielle tried to brush it off. She opened the letter in her phone again. The formal invite to speak at the Global Pediatric Surgery Conference. Her name was bold and clear at the top. Dr. Danielle Hayes, MD. But here, on this plane, that title meant nothing to most around her. As she scrolled, she heard soft laughter from the row behind. 2 young women were giggling, looking at their phones. "Look at her," one whispered. "Probably used points, or got lucky." Danielle didn't turn around. Mark heard it too. "Do you want to switch seats with me?" he asked. "No," Danielle said quietly. "If I leave, they win." A few minutes later, an older woman from the far end of first class stood and walked toward Danielle. Her name was Mrs. Grant, a calm woman with kind eyes. "Excuse me," she said, her voice gentle. "I couldn't help but overhear. Are you Danielle Hayes?" Danielle looked up, surprised. "Yes." "I thought so," Mrs. Grant said, smiling. "I saw your name on the speaker list for tonight's medical conference. I'm attending too." Danielle's face lit up slightly. "You are?" "Yes, I'm one of the donors for the Children's Surgery Program. I read your work. You've saved hundreds of lives." Danielle nodded humbly. "Thank you." Mrs. Grant turned and looked at Lisa, who was watching from a few rows away. "I think there's been a mistake," she said loud enough for others to hear. "This woman is not only a passenger, she's a hero." Lisa's face went pale. Passengers nearby paused. Some looked guilty. Others looked shocked. Mrs. Grant turned back to Danielle. "Don't let small people dim your light." Danielle smiled. "I won't." The rest of the flight went on in silence. But now, the silence felt different. Heavier for some. Eye-opening for others. Lisa didn't speak again. The passengers who had stared now looked down. Danielle closed her eyes and rested her head back. She didn't need their approval. She had already earned respect far beyond this plane. And in a few hours, when she would walk onto that conference stage, she wouldn't just share her story. She would own it. The plane started its slow descent toward New York. The sky outside turned golden as the sun dipped low. Inside the cabin, seat belts clicked, trays went up, and tired passengers prepared to land. But the mood was different now. Since Mrs. Grant's words, a quiet tension filled the air. The passengers who had stared earlier now avoided Danielle's eyes. Some looked uncomfortable. Some even looked embarrassed. But no one said anything. Except for Mark. "You handled all of that better than I could," he said. Danielle smiled faintly. Sometimes silence is more powerful than words. Lisa walked down the aisle again, doing her final checks before landing. This time, she didn't stop near Danielle. She didn't speak, but something about her face had changed. The cold confidence was gone, replaced with something else, regret, or fear of being found out. Danielle turned back to her phone. A new email had arrived. It was from the conference host, Dr. Myers. Subject: change in schedule. Danielle opened it. Her heart paused. "Dear Dr. Hayes, due to a cancellation, we have moved your keynote speech to the opening session. You'll now be the first speaker of the evening. Looking forward to your talk." Danielle sat up straighter. The first speaker. The one who sets the tone for the entire event. Mark looked over. "Good news." Danielle nodded. "I go first tonight." He smiled. "That's perfect." As the plane touched down, Danielle looked out the window and whispered to herself, "Let them see the truth." The plane rolled to a stop at the gate. Passengers stood and started collecting bags. Danielle waited in her seat, calm and quiet, like she always did. She never rushed. Lisa stepped forward to open the front door. Her hands were tense. She glanced once at Danielle, then quickly looked away. As Danielle stepped into the jet bridge, she felt the cool air hit her face. She walked slowly, with quiet confidence. Behind her, Mark followed. Mrs. Grant had already gone ahead. In the terminal, a woman in a black suit held a sign that read, "Dr. Danielle Hayes, keynote guest." Lisa saw it from inside the jet bridge. Her face froze. Danielle walked straight to the woman, who smiled warmly. "Dr. Hayes," the woman said, shaking her hand. "It's such an honor to meet you. We have a car waiting outside to take you to the conference center." Mark's jaw dropped slightly. "Wow." Lisa stepped outside the door, still in uniform. Her eyes met Danielle's. Danielle didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Lisa's mouth opened like she wanted to apologize, but the words didn't come. Danielle turned to the woman in the suit. "Shall we?" As they walked away, Mark caught up. "You showed more grace in 2 hours than some people show in a lifetime." Danielle smiled. "Grace is easy when you know who you are." Mark paused. "They'll remember you." "I hope they remember more than just me," she said. "I hope they remember what they almost missed." As they walked through the airport toward the exit, Danielle noticed something ahead. A group of young girls stood with their parents, wearing badges for a student medical program. They were waiting for their chaperone. One of the girls, maybe 12 years old, saw Danielle and whispered to her friend. The friend's eyes lit up. "That's her," the girl said. "That's the doctor from the video." Danielle smiled warmly and waved. The girls waved back, full of excitement. And just like that, all the pain from the flight faded. Because in those young faces, Danielle saw something powerful. Hope, respect, and most of all, a future where someone like her wouldn't be questioned, judged, or doubted. Just honored. The evening sun cast a golden glow over the tall glass windows of the New York Medical Conference Center. Inside, doctors, nurses, scientists, and donors filled the grand auditorium. People from all over the world had gathered for the annual Global Pediatric Surgery Conference. Everyone was talking, sipping coffee, flipping through event programs. But when the host stepped up to the stage and tapped the microphone, the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "our first speaker is not just a doctor. She's a lifesaver, a leader, and an inspiration. Please welcome Dr. Danielle Hayes." The spotlight turned. Danielle walked calmly onto the stage. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her hair pulled back, her shoulders straight. She didn't look nervous. She looked strong. The applause was polite at first, then it grew louder. Mark, seated near the front, clapped with pride. So did Mrs. Grant, and even a few of the student guests from the airport. Danielle stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd. She took a deep breath. Then she spoke. "Good evening. I'm honored to be here. But before I begin, I want to tell you about something that happened today." The room went quiet. Danielle continued, her voice calm and clear. "I boarded a flight to New York this afternoon. First class. I had my ticket, my ID, everything in order. But still, I was told, by a flight attendant and by silent strangers, that I didn't belong. People shifted in their seats. I was stared at, ignored, skipped, whispered about, treated like a fraud. Why?" She paused. "Because I didn't fit the image in their minds of who belongs in first class, or who belongs behind this podium." You could hear a pin drop. Danielle glanced toward the back, where the conference was being streamed on screens. Lisa was watching from a hallway, her uniform still on, her face pale. Danielle didn't flinch. "I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty. I'm here to tell the truth." She clicked a button, and behind her, photos appeared on the screen. Smiling children from different countries. Some had bandages, some had braces, all had bright eyes. "These are my patients. Many of them came to me with no hope. Their families were told nothing could be done. But we did it anyway. Not because I'm a miracle worker, but because I believe every child deserves a chance, no matter where they're from." She clicked again. A graph showed the hundreds of surgeries she and her team had performed for free. "Over the past 6 years, we've helped children in 12 countries. We've trained local doctors. We've built operating rooms where there were none. And we're just getting started." The audience leaned in. Their eyes were wide. Some were even tearing up. Danielle stepped away from the podium and stood at the front of the stage. "But I want you to think about something," she said softly. "If someone like me, someone with degrees, awards, and experience, can still be doubted, what about the next young girl who wants to be a doctor? What about the next little boy who wants to help people but gets told he doesn't look the part?" She paused again. "We cannot change the world with medicine alone. We must also heal how we see each other." Applause started slowly. Then it grew louder. Then it became a standing ovation. Some people clapped with tears in their eyes. Others looked at her like they were seeing her, and people like her, for the first time. Danielle stepped back, nodded politely, and walked off the stage. In the hallway, Lisa stood frozen. Danielle passed her without a word. But just as she turned the corner, Lisa spoke softly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know who you were." Danielle stopped. She looked back. "Next time," she said gently, "treat people like they matter, before you know who they are." Then she walked away. That night, the video of Dr. Danielle Hayes' speech was uploaded to the conference's website. At first, only a few people watched it. Other doctors, a few students, and the families of her young patients. But something happened. Within hours, the video began spreading like wildfire. People shared it on social media with captions like, "Watch this. You'll never forget her words." She was judged before they knew her story. Now, the world knows. This isn't just a speech. This is a wake-up call. By morning, it had millions of views. News anchors played clips of the moment Danielle said, "We cannot change the world with medicine alone. We must also heal how we see each other." TV shows invited her to speak. Podcasts reached out. Newspapers wrote headlines like, "The Doctor Who Silenced a Room and Moved the World." First-class prejudice exposed by a first-class woman. Even celebrities tweeted their support. One actor wrote, "Danielle Hayes just taught the world what real grace looks like." But Danielle didn't care about fame. She stayed quiet. She stayed focused. She returned to her hospital the next day, still wearing the same calm expression, still checking on her patients, still planning her next trip to an underdeveloped country that needed her help. At the hospital, one of her young patients, a little boy named Matteo, ran up and hugged her. "I saw you on TV," he said with a toothy grin. "You looked like a superhero." Danielle laughed. "I'm just a doctor, Matteo." "No," he said proudly. "You're my doctor." Behind him, nurses and staff clapped quietly. Some had watched her speech on their phones during their shifts. Some had cried. Some had finally understood what she carried every day. Even Dr. Reynolds, a senior surgeon who had always been distant, came up and shook her hand. "Danielle, you didn't just speak. You changed things." She nodded. "Thank you." Across the country, schools showed her video to students. Diversity groups invited her to speak. One little girl sent a handwritten letter that read, "I want to be a doctor like you. Even if people don't believe in me, I believe in myself now." Danielle kept that letter in her office. She looked at it every time she needed strength. Even the airline from the flight reached out. They released a public apology. They said they were reviewing policies and retraining staff. But to Danielle, those words didn't mean much unless they led to real change. And somewhere in a quiet apartment, Lisa, the flight attendant, watched the news in silence. She saw the world praising the woman she had doubted. She saw what she had missed. Tears filled her eyes, not because she had been exposed, but because she had been blind. That night, Danielle sat on her balcony, watching the city lights. She held a cup of tea in her hands, breathing in the calm. Mark had called earlier, so had Mrs. Grant. Both of them thanked her again. Both of them reminded her that the world needed more voices like hers. She smiled to herself. She didn't raise her voice to be famous. She raised it for those who couldn't. And now, the world had listened. Months passed since Dr. Danielle Hayes gave that unforgettable speech. But the impact didn't fade. It grew. People still watched her video. Schools still played it in classrooms. News channels still brought it up during conversations about race, respect, and change. But more than the words, it was the change that followed that truly mattered. One cold morning, Danielle walked into her hospital with a cup of coffee in hand. The sky was gray outside, but she felt peaceful inside. As she walked down the hallway, a nurse ran up to her with a smile. "Danielle," she said, "you have a visitor." Danielle raised her eyebrows. "A patient?" The nurse shook her head. "Not this time. Someone from the flight." Danielle walked toward the waiting room, not sure what to expect. There, standing near the window with nervous hands, was Lisa, the flight attendant from that day. She wasn't in uniform. She looked different, softer, more human. When she saw Danielle, she stood quickly. "I know I don't deserve your time," Lisa said softly, "but I had to come." Danielle stood quietly, listening. "I watched your speech 100 times," Lisa continued, eyes welling with tears. "I judged you before I even knew your name. I treated you like you didn't belong. But now I know I was the one who didn't belong in that mindset." Danielle didn't speak. Lisa pulled out a small folder from her bag. "After that flight, I quit. I went back to school. I'm studying to become a social worker. I want to help people now. For real." She placed the folder on the table. "This is my admission letter. I thought you should be the first to see it." Danielle opened the folder and smiled gently. "Good for you," she said. "I just wanted to say thank you for waking me up." Danielle nodded. "We all need a moment that opens our eyes. I'm glad you found yours." Lisa left with tears in her eyes, but also with hope in her heart. That evening, Danielle stood on a small stage at a local community center. She wasn't speaking to doctors this time. She wasn't speaking at a fancy conference. She was speaking to young girls and boys from low-income neighborhoods. Some wore hand-me-down coats. Some looked shy. But all of them watched her like she was a superhero. She smiled and said, "The world may try to tell you where you belong, but only you can decide that." The children clapped. A girl in the front row raised her hand. "Dr. Hayes, can I be like you one day?" Danielle knelt down and looked her in the eyes. "You can be better than me," she said. "You can be anything." The little girl smiled wide, like she'd just been handed a dream. Danielle stood and looked around the room. In every child, she saw a future rewritten. A future where stories like hers didn't end in pain, but in pride. Back at home that night, Danielle took out a small wooden box. Inside it, she placed something new, Lisa's admission letter. Next to the letter was the handwritten note from the little girl who once wrote, "I believe in myself now." She closed the box gently. Then she sat by her window, looking out at the stars. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had started to shift. And sometimes, all it takes is one voice, one story, one moment of truth to begin rewriting the future. A year had passed since the day Dr. Danielle Hayes stood in front of the world and changed hearts with her words. In that time, much had changed. But one thing remained the same: Danielle's quiet mission to bring light where the world had left darkness. She continued her work at the Children's Hospital, performing surgeries, mentoring young students, and visiting remote villages across the globe. But now, something was different. People saw her. People listened. And more importantly, people acted. One morning, she received a thick envelope in the mail. The return address said, "The Danielle Hayes Scholarship Foundation." She smiled. This was the third year of scholarships offered in her name. But this time, something new was inside. A letter. From someone she didn't expect. "Dear Dr. Hayes, my name is Jade Thompson. I'm 17 years old. Last year, I was ready to give up on school. I was told I wasn't smart enough, that girls like me didn't become doctors. Then I saw your video. I watched it with my mom. We both cried. I printed your words and put them on my wall. Every day, I read them. And every day, I worked harder. Today, I got accepted into the pre-med program at Columbia University. I'm the first in my family to go to college. Thank you for showing me I'm allowed to dream big. Sincerely, Jade." Danielle closed the letter with tears in her eyes. It wasn't the awards. It wasn't the applause. This was what it was all for. That afternoon, Danielle visited a new hospital wing under construction. The sign outside read, "Danielle Hayes Center for Global Pediatric Surgery." As she walked through the halls with the architect, she noticed a small group of high school volunteers cleaning up trash near the site. Among them was Lisa, no longer a flight attendant, now training as a counselor for youth. She waved at Danielle and gave a thumbs up. Danielle smiled back. Small moments, big changes. Later that evening, Danielle appeared on a quiet podcast, one that focused on stories of impact. When the host asked her, "What do you hope your story teaches the world?" Danielle thought for a long moment. Then she replied softly, "I hope it reminds people to slow down, to look beyond the surface. Everyone you meet is carrying a story. And sometimes, all someone needs is for one person to believe in them. We don't change the world with noise. We change it with truth, kindness, and the courage to stand still in the face of judgment and say, 'I belong.'" The episode went viral the next day. Weeks later, a little boy in Kenya wore a stethoscope around his neck and told his mom, "I'm gonna be like that doctor who talks nice and fixes hearts." And somewhere in a crowded school cafeteria, a young girl shut down a rude comment by saying, "Danielle Hayes was judged too, and look where she is now."